Hi, everybody. Hi, welcome to the live stream. Great to have you on tonight. Tonight is for all of us who cannot get enough of the Murdaugh trial, the absolutely craziest trial I've ever seen, with more rabbit holes, more trails than you could possibly even imagine. Today, what I wanted to do was just do a Q&A, and I wanted to just sort of talk about some of the questions. I went back through all of the comments, which I greatly appreciate, from the lives I've been doing all week at 7 o'clock. Don't forget to subscribe so you can be sure to get the notification that that'll be happening every night at 7. So I wanted to just do a Q&A and catch up on a lot of the questions, because when I go through the notes from the day, a lot of times there's not time left over for me to answer questions. And it's hard to do that on the spur of the moment sometimes anyway, when the chat is going really fast. So I wanted to just go ahead and talk to you a little bit, answer some of those questions, probably get some more, and let's just get started on that. The questions that I wanted to start with were some of the, I got a lot of questions really about the financial crimes and people wanting to understand more about what these crimes are about and why they're in the case. Tara Allen said, do you think the judge's analysis to let the financial evidence in is sufficient to avoid a successful appeal if he is found guilty? And that is the big question for the appeal, because there will be other issues on appeal. That won't be the only one, but it will be one of the biggest issues of all. The defense team says these financial crimes are irrelevant. This man is on trial for murdering his wife and son, not for stealing from his law firm, not for stealing from clients. And so it's ridiculous that you put all this other stuff in, and it's prejudicial. It's causing the jury to think this is a bad guy. Surely he murdered them if he's so bad in all these other ways. So that's what the defense argument has been, and that will be their argument on appeal, is that a lot of this stuff was too far afield. So Tara's question was, do you think that will pass through appeal? I will say this. It is, although I think people often hold out hopes for appeals, the records, statistics are that very few cases are truly overturned on appeal. In most cases, the decision is, well, it was cumulative. There were, in other words, some financial could have come in and the rest of it was just extra, but not enough to prejudice him if he gets convicted. So it's hard. It's hard to win one of those appeals. There has also been repeatedly, the judge has said, well, it's not just that I'm ruling that this is admissible. It's also that the defense opened the door. That makes it even more difficult for the defense to appeal. So in general, the judge has admitted a lot of evidence. He went very broad on the evidence. He probably will get upheld on appeal no matter what happens, but this is exactly where the appeal is going to go. So it's a good question. Mike Bales asked, if the financial crimes are coming in here, will there be another future trial regarding the 99 counts of financial crimes, or will that happen right now? And why are Men in My Shoes, who has an adorable little icon with little kittens in it, if Alex Murdaugh gets cleared of the murders and financial crimes are in, will that negate trying him for the financial crimes? Is it sort of a double jeopardy situation? And the answer to those, to Mike and to why are Men in My Shoes, is this is separate. And that's why the judge keeps reminding the jury, keeps saying, well, this is just a question of whether or not the motive, the state wants to prove that the motive for killing Maggie and Paul Murdaugh was that Alec Murdaugh wanted to distract and maybe eliminate all attention from his financial crimes. And that's why he did it. That's their motive argument. And the judge is saying to the jury over and over, this is not where you decide he's a bad guy and therefore you convict him because he did financial crimes. You still have, and the jury will be charged at the end of the case too, saying, here are the elements of murder. You must find that he met the elements of murder. And this is, so all of this is going to be related to motive, but not going to be related to whether or not he actually committed the murders. So in other words, there will be another trial. or perhaps many trials. Unless there's a plea bargain or some guilty plea, something like that, there will be another trial that would deal with the financial issues. They're not going to be presented to the jury or decided here. Now, Mandy Strong asked, how are these even admissible when he's only been accused of them and he hasn't been convicted? It's because of the question that the prosecution has raised of motive that I mentioned. There is a very thin line here, which is why the defense is screaming over this and saying, this is a trial within a trial. The state is putting him on trial for the financial crimes and muddying up the waters on whether he committed the murders. And they're saying, look, we've got a defense to the murders, but they don't seem to have as much of a defense to the financial crimes, and they feel like that's prejudicing them. So that's exactly what we're hearing. Mr. RN asked, wasn't the financial stuff going to all come out with the boat case? And that's sort of a complex question because you have to know what the boat case is. The boat case related to Paul Murdaugh boating under the influence as he was charged and a young woman being killed. Then the Murdaughs were sued because of that. That case was pending, and Alec Murdaugh was under a lot of financial pressure because, as the attorney for the case testified at trial, he was requesting that Alec Murdaugh not only pay $10 million, or if he couldn't, he wanted Alec Murdaugh's financial documents and had asked the court to make him produce those. And the state says it was that pressure that made Alec Murdaugh realize that come the hearing on Friday, the judge was probably, this is what Mark Tinsley says, going to grant permission for them to see Alec Murdaugh's financial records, and they were going to go to the Bank of America. Once they did that, they would say, give us all accounts where he has signatory authority, and they were going to find out about the fake forge account and some of the other financial improprieties. So that's what they're saying, that the financial stuff would have come in. We are going to hear opposite testimony on that from the defense. We've heard some cross, but I imagine they'll put up a legal expert who will say this was a long way from being a done deal. We already heard that argument in the cross-examination. Now, Javon Cope asked me, will the financial crimes be federal or state? And then Shell McLaughlin also said, did he evade the IRS too? And those are kind of can be packaged together. And the answer is these crimes, many of them could go either way. They could be federal or state. We know that the Fed is waiting in the wings on the Alec Murdaugh issue because they've already indicted and convicted Russell Laffitte. He was the CEO of Palmetto State Bank, who's accused of orchestrating conservatorships of Alec Murdaugh's clients and basically giving their money out, giving their money to himself, giving their money to Alec Murdaugh instead of what he had promised to do. There were also allegations that he had done financial improprieties in terms of loaning money to Alec Murdaugh that he wasn't entitled to, and in fact hadn't even signed documents for at the time. So that we know that the Fed is circling, that it has interest in the case. It has not yet, as far as I've seen, indicted Alec Murdaugh. Instead, the way it's worked is that the state has taken the lead. They often will decide who goes first. We also have seen the state indict Corey Fleming. That's another attorney involved with Alec Murdaugh in the Tony Satterfield case. Then we've seen the state add indictments to Alec Murdaugh for things that relate to all these financial crimes and specifically to taxes. Well, of course, state tax has a counterpart with federal tax, so that ultimately could also be a federal issue. So yeah, that definitely could go to federal issues, and that it may well be tried that way. They will probably run through all the state cases and then at least the murder case, and then they'll figure out, okay, how do we want to parse this out? Fed go first, state go first. How do we want to figure this out? They may even try in both places, convict in both places, and try to stack the sentences if they're able to convict in both places. So then I'm so sorry, I forgot to write down who asked me this, but will Alec plead out on the financial crimes? I feel almost certain that he will. So the big question is it going to do him any good? Is that going to help him to plead out on that? Because I'm not sure anybody is going to offer him a deal on it. If the prosecution just says, sure, plead guilty, but you have to serve 100% of the time, what did it benefit him to have pled guilty? He's already admitted to, according to testimony we've heard, Chris Wilson, his partners, and written a letter of apology to his paralegal. And he admitted, according to what they said on the stand, to financial crimes. So we know that that's already been done. We also know that he said specifically that he was, when he was talking to Chris Wilson, he said he was a drug addict and committed the crimes because of that. He's confessed judgment in the Tony Satterfield case, meaning he admitted that he did steal the money and the amount of it. So at some point, I think it would be really difficult for him to defend himself on that, given the number of admissions that he's made. He hasn't been convicted yet. He hasn't pled guilty. I just think it becomes more and more difficult for him to hold back on that. I got a bunch of interesting questions about procedure, which might sound boring, but actually is pretty interesting. I thought Alma Olson had a really good question. She asked about leading. She said they're yelling at her computer because they're rushing, they're leading the witness. And I thought that was super interesting because I think for a lot of people, their primary recent experience with a real trial would be the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard trial. And that was a little bit different. And you wouldn't know that unless you have been in other courtrooms and seen other trials. The way that worked, you may remember, Camille Vasquez objected all the time. And there was a lot of criticism of Elaine Bredehoff for not being able to handle that and not knowing how to ask questions properly because she was getting objection, and the objection was being sustained. In a lot of courtrooms, it's really fairly common to allow a certain amount of leading just to get the case done and just to move the case along. In some courtrooms, especially, and I'm not talking obviously about the really big important questions, but when it comes to just figuring out, the witness and what their background is, sometimes courts sort of are looser about that. And in a legal community, they may be a little looser about that too. Now, when it comes to the important questions, and you've seen that here, they will object. You will see that. It's not like they aren't objecting. It's just that our understanding of it might be colored by the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial, and that really was a little different. I personally had never seen anybody object as much as Camille Vasquez did. So I find what they're doing now they are leading more than I would expect, and there aren't really a lot of objections, but that's not totally unheard of. Sometimes that's the way it is. And there was a very funny comment early on in the chat that I saw. And also Eddie Joyce asked me, I heard witnesses saying, when I heard the person testify, is it normal for witnesses to watch testimony? I too was very surprised when I first heard the witness say, well, when so-and-so said, and I don't know if you saw that Blanca Simpson yesterday said that she had watched back the video on TV. And when she watched the video, she had decided that instead of hearing 4 voices, as she initially said, she heard 3. And I thought, really? She's watching the video over and over? And no one seemed to be concerned about it. In general, there is something called the rule of sequestration, and you invoke the rule of sequestration. That's, in general, just means that you ask that the witnesses not be allowed to see one another testify. I don't practice in that state, but I did find an article saying that in South Carolina State Court, unlike some courts, it's discretionary. You have to request it, and then the judge makes a decision about whether or not the judge is going to allow or force the witnesses to sequester and to not talk to one another or see anything related to the trial. Now, I will say too, really the biggest issue is it's not normal to have a trial broadcast live, really. We're kind of new to that whole concept. The only time I really know of it happening before on sort of a nationwide interest level was maybe all the way back to the O.J. Simpson case. Recently, with YouTube, court TV, Law and Crime have begun to sort of push those borders. So at this point, the witnesses have access to the testimony in an easy way that didn't used to exist. So Lindsay asked me, what do you think about Buster's behavior? And do you think the bomb threat had any of Alec Murdaugh's tricks around it? So I know, and DMH asked me, what do you know about the family acting up in the courtroom? So the answer is I know nothing more than what I've read, which is exactly what you've read, I'm sure, which is that Buster was accused, there was a photograph of it, of flipping off Mark Tinsley, the witness who talked about asking or demanding that Alec Murdaugh pay $10 million. And apparently Buster kicked a bottle. I don't know what evidence there is of that. And the sister of Alec Murdaugh passed a note up to defense counsel, and they were told, cut it out or you have to leave. So what's my view on that? I know very little about it. I do think that Buster and the sister as well, but particularly Buster, is in an unbelievably difficult situation. I can't really imagine what this whole experience is like for him. Obviously, he can't be flipping off a witness. I thought the picture was a little uncertain as to whether he really was or wasn't. It looked like he was chewing on his nail, so that may or may not really have even been a thing. But I can imagine that they are under a tremendous amount of pressure. Now, I've seen the thing talking about, did Alec Murdaugh have a smile on or something when he was talking about when it was announced that there was a threat to the courthouse? I don't know. I don't think Alec Murdaugh could have had anything to do with that. I really don't. I don't see how that's even possible. And given that, who knows, hundreds of thousands of people are watching the trial on a regular daily basis, I think it would be unlikely that it would stem straight from Alec. Who knows what he thought at the moment. I haven't seen the picture where I've heard he smiles at the time. I'll have to go back and look at it, but I doubt that seriously. I wanted to, I really already answered this question, but I just wanted to read this person's moniker, Beverly Bilbrey's Missing Teeth. I thought that was possibly the best name I've ever read. And Beverly Bilbrey's asked me, what are your feelings on the GoFundMe? I answered that pretty much yesterday. The GoFundMe was apparently set up for a witness by her daughter following her testimony. There was an allegation that Mark Tinsley, one of the witnesses and an attorney, donated to it $1,000. The way we know about that is that initially the defense brought that up and said, we really need to prevent him from testifying at all. He's not allowed to testify because he did this. The judge said, well, it sounds like cross-examination you would ask him about. And then the defense did not. The defense did not ask him about it. I don't know what the reason for that was. I was really, really looking forward to that personally, but maybe they thought they didn't have the evidence. Maybe they thought they didn't have the proof. Maybe there was some fact we don't know about. So I hate to speculate, given that. In general, what do I think about the idea of a GoFundMe for a witness following a trial? Much less before, but following a trial even, I think it's an incredibly dangerous precedent, because you can see what would happen. The person would, let's say somebody is told, if you will testify this way or that way, then we'll set up a GoFundMe and you'll get a lot of money. We all promise to contribute to it. That would be a way of buying someone's testimony. So that would be a terrible idea. I don't think that's what exactly was happening here, but it's something that just absolutely can't happen. And I feel like a lawyer should know better than to give money to something like that. So I hope all of that was just false and it was brought up and incorrect. And that's all I'm going to say on that. So now God's Watching asked, does anybody know why this case is being aired to the world in real time? And the answer is sort of that it's arbitrary. The way this has worked is the different states have different rules. Federal court will not allow a televised court. On the other hand, many states will, and their theory is this is a public proceeding. And so The public can attend, and that can be by TV, or it can be sitting in the courtroom if we have enough room. So we're going to let people attend. It's a public matter. The reason that this particular case got picked, though, unknown. The way it works is that court TV usually makes a decision about what it thinks people will be super interested in, and then tries to get the court to agree to allow it to broadcast. That broadcast is usually, most courts rule, available to everyone, because after all, the whole point of it was that it was public. And so you can't say something like it wasn't public and at the same time you can't say this is public and then refuse to share it with other people. So that's sort of how it works. I see a chat over here from Nika Dimitro. Has prosecution swayed you to guilty beyond a reasonable doubt? You're making me go straight there, huh? I am still holding off. I really want to see all of the testimony, and I really want to see the defense and what they have to say. I would say right now, I'm not decided. I mean, I'm not just saying that. I would say I'm truly not decided yet. But I also don't want to say until I've heard all the evidence. So Kimberly Ann asked me, and I want to talk now some about Alec Murdaugh taking the stand. Also hard questions like Nika's. Kimberly Ann asked me, is Alec Murdaugh going to need to take the stand to address the discrepancies in his testimony? And the answer is, if he wants to address them, yes, unless they can figure out a way to let other witnesses fill in the gaps. But there's not going to be anyone else who can address the fact that he said he wasn't at the kennels and there is supposedly his voice in the background. There's not going to be anyone else that I know of who could explain that away. The reason we know for sure that he's going to be forced to take the stand if he wants to explain it is we've already seen an example of that. The housekeeper, Blanca Wilson, said he asked her about the Vineyard Vines shirt he was wearing that night. And she suggested that she felt like he was pressuring her to say he was wearing a Vineyard Vines shirt. And she didn't think he was. She thought he was wearing a polo shirt. So the defense lawyer wanted to ask her, did you know that SLED, he had just come from being questioned by South Carolina law enforcement about the Snapchat video Paul took just shortly before the murders that showed him wearing this Vineyard Vines button-up shirt, and that's why he wanted to know what he was wearing, not because he was trying to pressure you. But the court would not allow the question and said and the prosecution's argument was, look, the defense lawyer can't come in and testify to that. If they're going to put that in, then Alec Murdaugh is going to have to get on the stand and say that that's what had happened that day if he wants that in evidence. Denise Pelton asked me, would you have Alec Murdaugh testify? That is so insanely hard. I know what I would be doing right now is exactly what they are doing, which is going back and forth on whether I would do that. The rule of thumb, you know what it is. The rule of thumb is absolutely not. The defendant should not testify. The defendant will only get himself into more trouble. And boy, is there a lot of room for Alec Murdaugh to get himself in more trouble here. And they got him 6 ways to Sunday, it looks like, on a whole lot of these financial crimes and some really terrible things like stealing from his brother. That's already been admitted. Like stealing from the young people who, the children of his long-term housekeeper. Really terrible things like that. So that would all come in. On the other hand, I think Alec Murdaugh has to be thinking to himself, what do I have to lose? What really do I have to lose? I'm already going, the prosecution said he could be looking at life in prison just for the financial crimes. So his choice basically is to go to jail for life. This may be what he's thinking anyway, to go to jail for life for murder and financial crimes, or to go to jail for life for financial crimes, but having proven in his mind that I didn't commit those murders. So I can see him saying, I just want to get on the stand and say I didn't do it and explain away these problems. It's going to be really, really crazy testimony if that happens. But I can see it going either direction. So where's the money? I got some questions about that. Richard Cullen asked me, now, how do the lawyers expect to get paid if Alec Murdaugh is broke? Excellent question. Excellent question. And he's got a big team. I also want to show you what Fox News was reporting. Fox News has been reporting that the lawyers for Alec Murdaugh are staying in a wedding event venue, which looks simply lovely. It has 5 houses on the property, and they rented out the whole thing, and it's costing $20,000 a night. Now, that is not cheap. So even if Alec Murdaugh sells Moselle, which is up for, I think, 3.9 million, 3.6 million, something in that range. Even if he managed to sell that at $20,000 a clip for 4 weeks, a night for 4 weeks, they're going to run through that money pretty quickly. I don't know where he's getting his money. And that goes straight to the next question. Carla McKenzie and Outrageous and Snowfire One all wanted to know, where did all the money go? I wish I could answer that. A lot of people wish they could answer that. He says, Alec Murdaugh says he had a drug issue and that he spent money on drugs. Could that possibly explain the sheer volume of money that it appears he that went through his hands that should have gone to clients? I cannot imagine that. The runner, also somebody who worked as a runner at his firm, said he used a lot of cash. Could that explain it? Even so, it just seems pretty tough to explain. He paid Cousin Eddie $500,000. Could that have been for drugs? Well, that's nowhere near the amount of money that went through his hands. Where is the money? I don't know. I also don't know how you break a 20-year addiction to opioids with 2 to 3 weeks of rehab. That's also remarkable. That particular rehab should be used by everyone, and they work miracles there. So I don't know. No one can answer those questions. They're really important. Where is the money? JC had a pretty good answer. I thought he said, well, he's either broke or he hid it. Maybe he did. I don't know. That's a great question. Now, on the murder facts, we got several questions from Happy Robot and lots of other people. What about the divorce? They kept saying, wasn't Maggie asking for a divorce? Maybe. All I know is nobody's testified to it. Like you, I heard all the rumors in advance that their marriage was on the rocks, that she was looking for a divorce, that she had consulted a divorce lawyer. All I know is they haven't come to trial. Nobody has come to trial and said, I'm an attorney. She consulted me about a divorce, if they even could testify to that. No one has said, I'm her best friend and she talked to me repeatedly. The only even clue we really have is the wedding band that was under the seat. We heard that from Blanca, the housekeeper, who cleaned out the car after the police had it and found the wedding band. Got some questions. Doesn't that mean sled is pretty sloppy? Well, maybe, yeah, that's a pretty important fact. If the wedding band is under the seat, that's probably something that should have been found by someone other than Blanca. Rhonda Longenfeld asked me, can't they look at Maggie's text messages to her friends to get a better idea of what she really felt toward Alex? They certainly could. They need a witness to come and talk about that. We may still get witnesses who are friends of Maggie's who are still to come. We've had several from Paul. We haven't really had anybody from Maggie's side come and talk yet, but they may still come. The prosecution says it has about 3 days left to go on testimony. We don't know which witnesses they'll bring. They had a list of 255 people. Obviously, not all of those have testified or will testify. So we're going to have to wait some to find out the last few witnesses that the state is going to put up the last 3 days. I feel 100% confident that if they have a witness who says that Maggie and Alec were having marital troubles, that witness is going to come. I am frankly surprised that witness has not already come, because that's such an important fact. And it's been a huge part of what the defense has been. The defense repeatedly has talked about what a great relationship Alec and Maggie had and how close Alec was to his son, Paul. So part of their explanation for why this could not have occurred is that Alec was too good a father and husband, and therefore it wouldn't have occurred. He wouldn't have killed them. That's what they're saying. So if there's evidence to the contrary, for sure, the jury needs to hear that evidence. Penny Ottawa asked me about the 3 IDs of Alex's voice. And she asked me that earlier in the week. There have been even more IDs of Alex's voice on that video that Paul took shortly before the murders. Now, Alec Murdaugh had said he wasn't at the kennels, but Alec Murdaugh's voice, numerous people have said, is on that tape. I personally was assuming that the defense would say, that's not Alec's voice. We haven't seen that. Wes Convery asked me, why is the defense not challenging this? That is, again, a great question, but I agree with him. The defense does not seem to be disputing it at all. I even saw a pretrial hearing where there was a statement, something to the effect by Dick Harpootlian, the defense lawyer, saying, well, although they have Alec's voice on that tape, as if they were acknowledging it. I don't know why they would not choose to do it. Maybe Alec remembered dropping by. Maybe they just figured too many people could identify the voice, or maybe there's some other explanation, like he forgot that he dropped by right before he went to see his mother. Although then you do have to wonder why he would be texting Maggie, hey, headed to my mother's, if they're standing right next to each other talking, and he would suddenly text her. You have to wonder about that. Maybe they just thought it was hopeless. Maybe they thought, well, okay, that's so clearly Alec's voice that we're going to give up on that argument and come at this a different way, or just deal with that one really bad fact. And it is by far the worst fact for Alec Murdaugh as far as the murders go. Now, Ashley asked me, do you think Alec Murdaugh will be found guilty for any of his alleged crimes? And she mentioned that there seemed to be some corruption and sloppy police work. I think it's extremely likely he'll be convicted when it comes to the financial crimes, because he's admitted a great deal of that to people, and even on the record in the Tony Satterfield case. Now, as to the murder, the statistics say criminal cases are likely to result in a conviction, but there are a lot of problems here with the state's case. So I don't know. I am still waiting. I still want more evidence from both sides before I feel like I can fully make a decision on this particular case. And Dean Shannon asked me, well, what about bullet trajectories on the autopsy? Wouldn't that be the best information? Indeed, it's kind of odd that hasn't come in already. The only real information we've had about the trajectories was when the defense put in some information on cross-examination saying, doesn't it look like this bullet came from here or there? Given that, I feel certain we're going to get some from the defense expert witnesses, but it is surprising the state has not put a lot in on that. One of the weirdest facts about the case, and the most difficult for the state, is that there were 2 guns. One gun killed Maggie and a different gun killed Paul. That makes it seem weird and unusual that Alec Murdaugh could have done both murders. So you would think a little more with the trajectories would have been a good idea, but they still have 3 days. And they also have not put on the autopsy information yet. I presume they'll do that at some point. Like I say, they have 3 days. So I figure that's still coming. Then Morpheus asked me about the accounting and why this wasn't caught years earlier. Said, it seemed like accounting control would have caught his embezzlement. One of the things that the law firm CFO said was that she felt really responsible. It was hard not to feel like she should have done something. I did really feel for her, particularly on the issue of the fake forge account, because that was designed to fool the law firm if the testimony is correct. The books would have balanced. There was a certain amount that came in for the client, and then that was paid out to this forge. The problem was the account they were paying, they wrote Forge, but rather than Forge Consulting was the real company, and Alec Murdaugh had set up another one that was Richard Alexander Murdaugh, DBA, doing business as Forge. And so that would have been very hard to detect, I think. They would have had to guess somehow that the check to Forge wasn't really to Forge Consulting, and I'm not quite sure how they would manage to do that. All right, let me run through real quickly and see what questions we've gotten from folks in the chat. I'm going to run up to the top really quick. Oh, if you have a question, and I'm given the time, I'm not going to be able to answer all of them, but put question marks at the front, and that'll help me spot your question. Oh, and while I'm thinking about it, please be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. We are covering this trial all week. We're covering this trial at 7 o'clock every night. This is way too interesting to miss, so you do not want to do that. So I'm looking through for question marks at the beginning. And C Webb is asking me about the guilt and whether it'll be because of his character. That is exactly what the defense is worried about. They are very worried that all of this financial stuff will be what he's convicted for, instead of whether or not he murdered Maggie or Paul. I hope the jury will be able to put all that aside, focus on the question of whether or not Maggie and Paul were murdered by Alec Murdaugh. That is just the critical question, and I hope that they'll do that. I get that it would be hard. The state felt like this was the motive. That's why it's been allowed in. Is it possible he will go through 3 more trials? Financial, death of Gloria Satterfield, and Mallory Beach. So depends on what you mean. Now, you seem to be asking about criminal trials. This is Mike's question. As far as financial crimes, I think he probably would plead, but he might go through another trial, particularly if they refuse to plead. The death of Gloria Satterfield, I understand and have seen the reports, including from the ABC local news affiliate, that Gloria Satterfield's body was going to be exhumed. I've seen no follow-up on that in terms of whether it was actually done. I realized that there was speculation and rumor that maybe Alec had something to do with her injuries. She fell down the stairs, and according to Alec was not present at the time, as I understand it, but she supposedly tripped over the family dogs. There was an insurance collection. I know of no facts that would suggest that Alec Murdaugh had anything to do with that. Maybe if they exhume her and actually do an autopsy, focus on that, perhaps some other answer will come out. But as of right now, I don't know of any reason why he would be. There was, though, discussion about exhuming her. Whether it happened or not, we don't know. The Mallory Beach death, I don't think that would be a criminal matter. From what I understood, Paul was going to be tried criminally, but there would be a civil case, or possibly a civil case. Now, I believe Buster settled out, but that doesn't mean Alec Murdaugh has. Of course, Alec Murdaugh doesn't really have any money anymore. At least that's what we thought, except for those really lush those really lush surroundings where they're staying. I did see someone in the chat saying that it was $20,000 a week, not a night. Well, that would be better. That would make a lot more sense. So hopefully they're right about that, because that was crazy expensive. So Yanni B is asking me, has it been brought up that the 911 call and records, Alec is calm until the dispatch picked up? They played the 911. I think it was the whole thing. He sounded hysterical to me. He didn't sound calm first, but perhaps they didn't play the whole tape. I heard what they played at trial, and he sounded really hysterical. So I don't know, Yanni. I can't really answer that. Lynn LaRocca asked me, since the defense didn't bring up the GoFundMe, do you think they'll bring it up in closing? No, I don't think they can. I don't think they have any right to do that. The only way they could is if they asked the judge for permission to bring back the witness, Shelley Smith, who was supposed to receive the GoFundMe. I don't know if they plan to do that and then maybe bring Tinsley back, ask for permission. But unless there's some kind of evidence in the trial about it, I mean, I think it does cast doubt on the testimony of Shelley Smith, because of the fact that it just looks like there's at least an argument that can be made that, she knew about it in advance. I doubt they'll be able to prove that, but they don't necessarily have to prove that. They just have to be able to ask her the questions. And right now, they've made no attempt to do that. We'll just wait and see what happens in the defense portion of the case. So, Metal Cubana asking a real technical question here. Do demonstrables need to be entered into evidence prior to closing arguments? If it's a true demonstrable, usually it's not allowed into evidence. Usually it's not considered actual evidence. In other words, so should the prosecutor, so asking about the timeline, could they do a timeline later on? I think that they could. I think that they could write it out, say, or even just put up something saying, here's what you heard. I think it would be far more effective, far, far, far more effective if they were doing it as the trial went along. And the jury could kind of follow along. Oh, yeah, that's right. That is what was said. Oh, yeah, okay. And I think it would be much more effective. So, all right, let's see. I'm running through here, checking on question marks at the beginning. Wow, I'm way far behind. I hope I didn't miss anybody with the super chat. That would be really bad. There were a lot of comments. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. And I'm looking for questions, particularly ones with the question marks at the beginning. Okay, Terry Garbs, won't the financials coming in now prejudice a jury if he's tried for those? Interesting. They will have to, just like they did with this jury, pull in a whole bunch of jurors and ask them what they've heard and what they know and what they think in advance. And will it have some prejudice on the jury? Yes, probably. It probably will. That I will say, though, there's already a lot of prejudice there. There is a lot of testimony and evidence about this, and it's going to be well known in the community. So somebody asking about the timeline and whether Alec, Maggie, and Paul had all gone to the kennels after supper. I think it's very possible that that's what happened and that Alec misspoke and said, I didn't go to the kennels, and he really did go to the kennels, and then he ran back to the house and went straight to the mother's from there. I think that's possible. I think if he gets on the stand, that's probably what he'll say, is that he forgot he did go to the kennels and then came back to the house, something like that. That's just a guess. Okay, I think I answered the question about the trial. Thank you, Carolyn, for your question. And, Morpheus, I already answered a question for Morpheus, so good to have you back. Why would the state bother to try the financial crimes? So primary reasons, so he's saying, okay, if he's already convicted of murder, why would you bother to try the financial crimes? Well, one reason is that there will be an appeal. And if for some reason, years later, years down the road, it got overturned, maybe you want to have in your back pocket, if you're the state, the fact that he also has to serve a lifetime for, and you have that reason. It also would give him less incentive to appeal if, in fact, it's not going to really do him any good. He's life in prison no matter what. I don't know the probationary rules or anything like that, whether or not he can maybe get out early. I have no idea on that. I just remember that the prosecutor said something about it could be life in prison. So he could be facing life in prison. I remember him saying that. So somebody asking about why wasn't he taken in for questioning, and about his housekeeper being allowed in the house. Why were people allowed all over the crime scene? These are good questions Carrie Michelle is asking, but that's part of what the defense's argument is. So the defense's argument is sort of twisting that. Initially, that was taken as sort of privilege, or that was something given to Alec Murdaugh that was not something given to anybody else, and it was unfair. He was being treated specially. But the defense is turning that around and saying, look how sloppy this was. I mean, you were incredibly sloppy. You didn't even notice the khaki pants he was wearing the night of the murders lying in a puddle on the floor. It took the housekeeper cleaning that up. You let the housekeeper come in and clean. Like, where were you? What were you doing? And so that's become one of the main arguments the defense is making, is that there was really a sloppy investigation by South Carolina law enforcement. That's what they're arguing. All right, I'm zipping through looking for question marks. Oh, thank you, Faticus. I really appreciate that. Thank you. I'm going to look right around there in case he had a question. Okay, so still looking. Financial crime victims, can they get their money back? Well, there are two issues with that. Well, one answer is that some of them already have, because of the fact that the law firm paid a lot of people back. The law firm, according to the testimony of the CFO, went to a lot of the clients and said, we have learned that our partner stole from you and we owe you this money. She said, I believe it was $4 million had been paid back by the law firm. So those people have already been paid back. There are other financial victims who probably won't get paid, but there are a lot of suits. You may remember that on Friday, there was the cross-examination, sort of a strange cross-examination of Tony Satterfield was, while Alec Murdaugh may not have told you about the 4.3 million he recovered for you and may never have paid that to you. Isn't it true that that turned out great for you because now you've collected 6 million for other people because they wronged you? Look, you're all good. It was sort of a strange set of questions, but so some of them may have other places they can go to look for people who knew about what was happening and didn't protect them. Some of them, many of them probably will get some money back. I can't say all of them though. All right, still looking for questions. I'm probably going to get to the end and there will be like 100. Like, whoa. So what do you think the likelihood his cousin was one of the killers? And pointing out that cousin Eddie was supposedly hired to kill Alec Murdaugh and shoot him in the head on the side of the road. So cousin Eddie apparently was willing to be hired for that task. So the question is sort of, well, could cousin Eddie have been hired by other people? We are all waiting breathlessly for cousin Eddie to take the stand, but there's not evidence of that right now. There hasn't been evidence submitted of a large payment to cousin Eddie at exactly the right moment that I'm aware of, so we don't know. There's been speculation, but it's really just rumor. As far as I know, there's zero evidence that cousin Eddie did this. Obviously, we do know that SLED took the phone for Eddie, and it was really bizarre testimony on Friday because they brought their documents for 5 phones. They said, we tested these 5 phones. These 2 people who might have been suspected, we found out they weren't even in the area, so we dismissed them. And then we looked at Alec, Maggie, and Paul. Okay, normal. But then on cross, there was a question, well, what about these 2 people, one of whom was cousin Eddie? And the witness for the state admitted, well, yeah, we took his, we did take his phone and looked at the data, but I didn't bring that information with me. Why not? You're here to testify. Tell us what the answer is. So that's a good question by Puck F17. We are all waiting to find out what that would be. And I do think the state ought to bring that evidence just as a matter of closure, just as a matter of sort of honesty. I think we need to know what they found. And if what they found was that cousin Eddie was in fact in the area, let's find out. Let's know that. And that doesn't mean that cousin Eddie didn't work with Alec. The state could still prove that. But if that's the case, then I think it's really the state needs to let everybody know that. It needs to be part of what they bring. So we talked about the hidden money. So thank you, Nancy. And I hopefully got you your answer on that. And we are running really close on time. Do I think Alec embellished the amount and settled the boat case? I noticed that too. That Terry Aldheiser is asking me about the fact that originally $10 million was the amount that was testified to by Mark Tinsley, the attorney. And he said, I wanted $10 million from Alec Murdaugh. And Alec said, what? I could maybe scrape together $1 million, but nowhere near 10 million. Then there was testimony from Blanca, the housekeeper, that Maggie said to her, they want 30 million and we don't have anything like that. Where'd the 30 million come from? Was that Alec trying to spend more money out of it and tell her he paid 30? I don't know. I noticed that discrepancy too, though, and thought that seemed surprising. I wondered if initially maybe they floated that number in settlement and she had heard that number and he hadn't talked to her about it again to say, oh, now it's only 10. I don't know. But I noticed that was an odd discrepancy. All right, I'm going to zip on through just to make sure I have not left out any super chats that I haven't responded to. I hate it when I do that. Thank you to Dragon Man Sasson. I appreciate it. And let's see, anybody else? And I'm going to look at questions. All right. Sorry. Hate to be boring while I zip through here. Just want to make sure that I cover everything and don't want to leave anybody out. I see some comments about the Krispy Kreme. That was some great testimony on Friday. People asking about the missing clothes. That is a big, big question. But I really felt like it was undermined by the fact that the state had by the fact that Blanca admitted that although she hadn't seen these clothes again, they were clothes he had more than one of, and he took a bunch of stuff with him, presumptively. He never stayed at Moselle again, so I didn't feel like it was that big. Maggie's pajamas on the floor. Me either. I cannot figure that out. What was up with that? That was really bizarre testimony. Who would do that? I could certainly see people picking up all the pans around and putting a cover on them for Alec. Oh, let's clean up for him. This is all left out. We'll put it in the refrigerator. Totally made sense. But the pajamas and the underwear lying on the floor to the laundry room, that was really, I don't know. I found that really curious too. I sure hope somebody is going to explain that for us. That's really critical. All right, I'm coming through to the last questions. So I really do appreciate your questions. I'm sorry we are running out of time. I've given it about 50 minutes, so I'm sorry about that. And I do appreciate that very much. I'm going to hit my last questions here. I'm almost to the bottom. Thank y'all for sticking around, and thank you for coming. Be sure to subscribe because we are going to be doing this every night at 7. And you really want to follow this trial. It's absolutely fascinating. So be sure to subscribe, like this video if you would, and I will see you on